This is how I went from being addicted to drugs, being extremely overweight, having my body being physically broken from knee injuries to neck injuries to having daily seizures. How I went from that to the person that you see here today. Hi, my name is Christian Andres Santos. I am 30 years old. I am a child of God. I follow Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and I am a music artist. I make original music based on my experiences and just honestly thanking God for everything He's done in my life. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. So, I started doing drugs pretty early in my life. I grew up in a Christian household, so I grew up knowing of Jesus and knowing of God, but I don't know if I ever really had that personal relationship, or I definitely had experiences and I felt the Holy Spirit even back being a child, but I don't think I really knew how to foster that relationship. And as soon as trouble started hitting my family, my immediate family, I immediately started looking towards external things to try to numb that pain that I was experiencing and the emotions I couldn't really express. So, as most people do, the first thing I turned to was weed. That led to alcohol, which led to ecstasy, Molly, cocaine, shrooms, acid, and the list goes on and on. There's a lot of things I did. There's only a few drugs that honestly I had limits to. I'm not going to touch those because I knew how much they destroyed people's lives. And the three that were off limits at that time for me were crack, meth, and heroin. But everything else was I was open to it. So that was my young life leading up to my young adulthood. And just trying to find anything that would take me away from this physical reality that I was experiencing. And that obviously kept me in a downward spiral, which obviously led to extreme depression. Literally contemplating suicide every single day of my life, every single moment of my life. Not even just contemplating suicide, but contemplating how I would commit said act. It was a very dark time in my life. I didn't really have that many people to turn to. It was just really my mom that I really had a really close relationship with that I could really hold on to. But even that wasn't enough for me. So I needed these external things because I still hadn't had that close relationship with Jesus as I do today. Um, as I turned kind of into my younger 20s, that's when a lot of these physical problems and symptoms started manifesting in my body. It started with some knee injuries. I tore my meniscus on one knee. I got diagnosed with arthritis on both knees, literally being in my younger 20s. So that really started this period of my life where I just spent years of my life going to doctors because they really didn't understand why I was going through all this physical pain. Yeah, there was certain like things that they were finding, like the meniscus tear and things like that, but it wasn't enough for them to explain all these things that I was going through. And I was starting to have physical pain literally all over my body. I just had this muscular joint pain, chronic every day, and it just kind of progressively kept intensifying and getting worse. It still slowly started transforming over time. Obviously it didn't start from one day to the other. Kind of started slowly, but I started getting really bad nerve pain. It felt like stabbing. It felt like knives being put into my body in different locations, from joints, from my ankles to my feet to my hands to literally my face and my head and my mouth, literally all over my body, and very deep, sharp, momentary pain. But regardless, it was very, very difficult. And obviously I didn't really understand what was going on, so that's why I kept going to see these doctors, rheumatologists, neurologists, all these sorts of things. After some time going to all these doctors and slowly getting added a lot of different medications, that's when they finally diagnosed me with the first thing, which was fibromyalgia at first, which that was their way of explaining all this muscular pain that I was experiencing and this widespread body pain. But as time went on, they realized that even that wasn't really enough to really describe or to basically put a point to all my physical symptoms, because fibromyalgia doesn't really cause nerve pain and these sorts of things. So as they started doing more tests on me, that's when they stumbled across the fact that I had this condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is this genetic disorder that affects your connective tissue in a way where the collagen production isn't working properly. So that leads to weakened connective tissue, literally, and it affects everyone very differently. You can look Ehlers-Danlos up online and you can find literally pictures and videos of young people literally being in wheelchairs, being in crazy bad shape. And like I said, it really affects everyone very differently. Some people it really affects everyone in the physical sense of like their joints and their ligaments and such like that. But for some people it might affect their gastrointestinal system a little bit more. Some people it might affect their neurological central nervous system, and it just kind of like affects people in a very different way. So I finally got diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos, and at this point I was prescribed at least 4 different maybe 3. I was prescribed gabapentin, which is for nerve pain. I was prescribed Cymbalta for the fibromyalgia / body pain. And that was like the first 2 drugs, I guess, strong drugs that I was prescribed. And then after a while, they prescribed me Oxy. So I'm on an opiate, a strong opiate, literally daily, all the time, taking 3 times a day. So I'm on those 3, I believe, at that moment. And that's when I had my first seizure. And I still remember it till this day, because that was a turning point for me. Up until that point, life was pretty not fun to begin with already at that point. But after that seizure, literally my life went on a decline really fast. I remember waking up from that first initial seizure, not really feeling normal. The best way I can describe it was like it felt like I got hit by a truck. It felt like everything was foggy. It felt like I couldn't really think properly. It really had a big effect on my cognitive function. And not only that, but after waking up from the first seizure, the convulsions were so violent that I couldn't really swallow food without it being painful. So I was on literally surviving off of liquids for maybe the first, I think it was like a day or 2, where I was just literally drinking Gatorade, soup, smoothies, things of that nature. And that was the first seizure. Kind of time went by, and then maybe like a month or 2 after that, that's when I had my second one. That time I did get the ambulance called, showed up to the ER. Literally the people there were thinking I was having a stroke by the time I got there, just because of my vitals, extremely high blood pressure, heart rate, everything, and I couldn't move, because by the time I got to the ER, I stopped convulsing, but I couldn't move for a while. So very atypical for seizures to begin with, and they really didn't know what was going on, and the ER doctors encouraged me to really start seeing neurologists and really going down this path of there's something more serious going on. And after a couple different doctors and trying to really get someone to figure out what was going on, that's when they finally figured out that I had this thing called Chiari malformation. And that's something that sometimes occurs with a lot of Ehlers-Danlos people. And what it basically is your ligaments in your neck become so unstable, and part of your brain becomes so lax because of the Ehlers-Danlos that it causes a contact between the bottom of your brainstem with your skull. And that contact occasionally will cause a lot of different neurological symptoms. Seizures aren't really something typical with them, but it's also something that can occur. And for me, that's what was happening. So I started having these seizures a lot more frequently, from once a day to sometimes 2 to 3 times a day. Occasionally, maybe I wouldn't have one day, but it started being really bad really quick. By this point, I'm already using walking assistance to get around. I had already been on a cane for a little while, but after the seizure started happening, it really started affecting my equilibrium and my balance. And obviously I'm just getting weaker and weaker by the moment as I'm becoming more and more bedridden. And also my muscles are just not being used, so I'm becoming weaker, gaining weight, etc. So I got to a point where I had to start using crutches. So I was literally walking with crutches and using a neck brace literally 24/7. I would literally sometimes even sleep with a neck brace on, because the relief that it would give me was worth the being uncomfortable with it on. But yeah, it was literally, looking back at it, it's really crazy to even realize how far God has brought me from that place that I was in, because I remember being in that place and thinking that was going to be how the rest of my life would look like. And I am just so grateful for everything God has done with me, for giving me another opportunity to be healthy, to fulfill the purpose that He has for my life. Something I briefly skipped was, as this is before the physical symptoms really started going crazy, but this was the last time I took a psychedelic, and I took a very high dose of shrooms, and I got possessed by a demonic spirit, 1,000,000%. I remember being in the bathroom, looking in the mirror, and feeling the spirit go inside of me, and instantly I heard growling like a dog, like a mad dog growl in my head, and I was getting extremely disturbing images of a witch in the forest and people hanging off of trees, and just really, really, really crazy visions. And I still hadn't had a very real encounter with the Holy Spirit yet, so I didn't really know what to do, and that kind of happened right before, I guess, this whole downfall of my health started happening. I don't know how much that really has a connection with that. There's so many things that happen in the spiritual world that we don't really know how much it can or doesn't affect our day-to-day life. And I think a lot of us in the modern world kind of look past all this spiritual realm that exists around us. But there's no denying that it's there, both the good and the bad. And so after this very evil encounter with the spirit, it didn't really manifest anymore, but at the same time I didn't really feel like I was alone. And that's when I kind of started trying to get closer to God. And I remember starting to go to church more often and often. And I do remember the one night where I had a very real encounter with the Holy Spirit. And right before that, I remember my grandmother from Argentina, she send me a verse, because I was already starting to go through a lot of these physical problems. I don't think I was having seizures yet at that moment, but she was aware of what I was going through, and she was praying for me, and she sent me a verse where it says that basically that the last will be the first and the first will be the last, and how I was chosen. And I remember that night, that's when I really had a very real experience with the Holy Spirit. And that was, I guess, the beginning of my walk with God, and just trying to have him be more of a present part of my life in the day to day. And then, as I said, I kind of went down this really bad health journey, and I got to the point where after I started having the seizures, I obviously got prescribed anticonvulsants, and then I got prescribed I got prescribed Xanax as well, to help my central nervous system relax and not be so hyperactive. And on top of all of that, if you can even imagine, I was smoking like crazy weed, and I was just literally barely hanging on to reality. Honestly, the pain and just the physical existence was just so much to even handle to begin with. And despite being on that whole list of medication, it was just like, it was still too much to bear. And I remember having this one day where I just had enough, and I just had a breakdown. I got very angry. I threw my phone across the backyard. I smashed it. I smashed my computer, the glass of my PC case, with my cane or my crutch, I don't even remember. And I was just so done with life at that time. And I told God, if your purpose for me is to leave this earth, then take me with you. But I am not gonna keep living this way. And I grabbed all the medication that I had, all 6 or 7 of them, and I went to the toilet, and I just threw all of them in the toilet and just flushed the drain. The only person with me at that time was my mom, so she was the one that I was kind of venting, and she saw all this happening. A day or two later, that's when I had another doctor's appointment. I let them know what I did with the medication, that I threw everything away, that I wasn't planning on continuing to take the medication. And they strongly discouraged me from doing that. They told me that I could possibly die literally just from the withdrawal, that these medications were so strong that I couldn't just go cold turkey with them. But honestly, I didn't care at that time. I really put my trust in God and told him, that conversation I had with him, which was, if you want me to die, then take me with you. But like, I'm not gonna keep living my life in doctors' offices and literally spending half of my week getting seen by specialists and the other half of my week in bed, being bedridden. And the crazy thing about all of this is, the day that I threw my medication away was the last day that I had any seizure. So it's been a little over 4 years of being completely seizure free. And that's where I guess the uphill climb started, because that whole health experience really was a decline, and I kind of finally hit rock bottom. And I think that's where Jesus really met me, and he gave me his hand, and he kind of put me on a level floor. And from there, it was just an uphill climb of just slowly progressing. I will always give God the credit for for performing that miracle, because just the fact of having the seizure stop, that was the biggest life changing and biggest thing that could have really helped me change my life at that point. That the seizure stopping allowed me the freedom to slowly start regaining my cognitive function, start feeling more and more like myself. Then I slowly started going for walks. I slowly started letting go of the crutches, switching back to a cane. Then I let go of the cane and I was walking by myself with a limp, but I was walking by myself. And then I got into a gym. I started slowly trying different exercises, and I'm talking like literally starting at rock bottom, especially with everything I had gone through, but especially the fact that technically I have this thing called Ehlers-Danlos, which makes everything just weaker. I was going into it not fearful, but just being very smart and not being dumb with the way I push myself. So I was going very, very slow at first and just kind of getting the strength and, kind of developing that base. And now 4.5 years later, whenever I show people my pictures, it's literally I'm an unrecognizable different person. And this isn't to say that I am the person I want to be yet. I think it's always a constant journey of self-improvement, working on your weaknesses, and there's always things that we can improve on. But I am extremely proud of how far I've come along, and I will always be thankful to God for helping me when I needed him the most. He showed up for me. So yeah, that's my testimony.